Is Kay ready? Kay ready?
Session is resumed.
We are now in the post-lunch session. Order number 2.
Order number 2, sir. In the name of Senator the Honorable K. McConney,
Yes.
Minister of Innovation, Science and Smart Technology, to move the second reading of the Planning and Development Amendment Bill 2020.
Mr. President, the Planning and Development Amendment Bill 2020 that I rise to introduce, it seeks to strengthen the Planning and Development Act, which was passed in January 2019. You may recall, sir, that this act sought to update and to improve the efficiency and the transparency of the planning process, the planning system. Certainly, if these amendments do pass, one important thing that this would usher in is a more collaborative approach that would see the various authorities that have input into the planning process working more closely together as opposed to disparately as they're doing now, and that they'd be able to leverage technology to deliver a higher level of efficiency than we have seen, greater transparency in the decision-making process, and a greater ease of doing business to the public. Mr. President, you will recall, sir, that an inordinately long waits for planning approvals and permissions have been a bugbear for professionals, for individuals alike, whether local or international, who are seeking to invest in Barbados and to build anything from a regular family house to a major structure. The hurdles, regulatory, process, and in some cases human hurdles, have made it very difficult for investors and professionals and everyday people to move their projects through the town and country planning department and associated industry agencies. And I am told, sir, that one would not in many cases get fast service unless one perhaps knew somebody who could pull a string. And so the long delays, and this has been long-standing, and we are seeking to address this at this time, this long delay string pulling process, which could and often did get caught up in the decision-making that did not always seem fair and transparent to some people. It has impacted Barbados' reputation. It has impacted our attractiveness as a place to do business and our competitiveness globally. And taken together, the effect was it has really and truly stymied our country's ability to move faster and to put in place the infrastructure and services necessary to stimulate and facilitate certain aspects of growth. There are many reports, Mr. President, of people right here in Barbados who have had difficulties transitioning from one type of home to another. There are stories, sir, of international investors who have pulled up stumps and have walked away from Barbados with their money and their goodwill, and unfortunately also their frustration in tow, after waiting for years in some cases to have multi-million-dollar investments or even simple adjustments that they want to make to structures approved. I think we have to do some truth-telling to ourselves and confess, sir, that this has been the situation that is very real. And you can't fix what you do not admit, sir. The world has noticed the inefficiencies in the system, sir, and the world has low-rated our planning environment here in Barbados. You would be aware, Mr. President, of the Ease of Doing Business Index that is administered by the World Bank. It is a resource that is used by investors, it is used by international development funders and others globally to assess and to make decisions on whether a particular country or jurisdiction, if you will, has a regulatory environment and the business facilitation structures and processes that are conducive to the ease of doing business. Barbados, sir, on the world's Ease of Doing Business Index was 128 out of 190 in 2019, moving just up one place from 129 in 2018. And if we told ourselves, sir, that in a world of contests, we were 128 out of 190 of anything, it is certainly not something that should attract our pride and industry as we hold on to on a regular basis. The measuring stick, sir, that has been used to determine these rankings, Mr. President, they include how easy it is to do a number of things, including quite a bit associated with planning. And if you'd permit, sir, I'd just like to share a few of them. It measures how easy it is to start a business, how easy it is to employ persons, that was recently added, how easy it is to deal with construction permits, how easy it is to get electricity or register property or get credit or protect minority investors, how easy it is to pay taxes, to trade across borders, to enforce contracts, and to resolve insolvencies. These are all some of the areas on which the World Bank's index will measure the ease of doing business and will tell us where we fit within this world, and it will also tell those who are using these indices to be able to plan their next investment move. Where are the best jurisdictions in the world in order to get business done? Now, this government, you know, Mr. President, we will not just see a problem and leave it indefinitely. We will seek to address it head on in good time. So, sir, in recognizing, in first admitting that we have a problem within planning and seeking to address it, what Barbados has done, we have engaged the World Bank itself, addressing the dis-ease and the uneasiness for some in doing business here in Barbados. And our engagement was not just for the technical support on how to improve Barbados's ranking. That's just only a part of it. More fundamentally, it was how can we affect the lives of people to make doing business easy for all local and international investors and persons who wish to move their projects through the planning process. So our interests in this engagement was not just improving efficiency of government, sir. It was equally the customer experience and what it takes. Again, sir, we are not perfect. We recognize where our shortfallings are as a country, our shortcomings are, and we are continuing to move towards reform. Sir, in the engagement of that technical assistant, the World Bank provided what they call a reform note. The reform note is like a roadmap for how we could improve on those number of areas on which I listed earlier, and then there are subheadings within each of those in a specific way. What Barbados did, sir, was to set up a national team that was brought together under the leadership of the Prime Minister, the Honorable Mayor Amor Motley, to follow through on the implementation of some of the reforms that were part of that reform note to enable us to do better for all those who would seek to use our planning system. The reforms matter, sir. As I mentioned, because there are those who make decisions around the world with regards to how they will move their money, how they will move their families, how they will do business in general, they use some of these rankings in very meaningful ways to move forward. You will recall, sir, that the new Planning and Development Act of 2019 sought to reorient the entire planning process from being very heavy on the regulation and to expand the facilitation role, because we found that it was not so much focus on making sure that we can enable people to get the right structures that fit with the values of Barbados, but it had so many strictures that it was creating difficulty for people to do business. So it was not just a regulatory role, but significantly looking to expand the facilitating role or the facilitation role of our planning system. And so some of the things that were introduced at that time, sir, and these amendments build on some of those, sir, decisions to deny or to require conditions to a planning application would have to be given. There were some specific times given within which responses must be given to applicants. So they had to be given in a short and a very specific time. They had to be explained. We were not at a point anymore where you can just say, well, this is turned down, this is denied. An explanation would have to be given, and the opportunity given to persons to say, yes, this is denied. However, these are the things that you can do to get it approved. That was one of the areas introduced. Also, that those decisions can be challenged. We then had a tribunal system that would help to enable a challenge to certain decisions, and that those decisions must then pass the test of equal and fair treatment. Planning decisions, as in that act, we continue to encourage that they could not just be arbitrary. They would have to follow a plan that does many things for Barbados. Promote sustainable development, look at what is safe and sustainable, aligned with our goals to build infrastructure that can withstand impacts of climate change and other shocks. That planning decisions would also need to follow values that protect the natural environment, environmentally friendly, not just necessarily, sir, about going green in terms of respecting nature as we find it, but also, sir, in terms of restoring where possible what we have lost or destroyed. The subject of consultation was also introduced at that time, where there was the opportunity for pre-consultation, whereby when people are going to invest enormous amounts of money in doing drawings and other things, they had the opportunity to have a pre-consultation that was on the record. It isn't something you have over in the back with somebody quietly, but on the record, where the investor, developer, applicant could have a pre-consultation in the open and transparent way and recorded with the department that would enable them to say, before you go further and invest further millions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of dollars, what is the likelihood that this would be approved? That opportunity was also a drawing, and that the intention was that those decisions would be available online so people could go and see that. You will recall, sir, that there was also, at that time in the amendment 2020, we have sought to shift the power from a single person. You will recall, sir, that the chief town planning officer had a whole lot of power that for decision making, and sometimes it was said in the many consultations that we've had since June of 2018 that indeed sometimes that power was too discretionary. And that power of a single person is being replaced with a planning and development board along with various named subcommittees as well as the ad hoc committees that could be engaged. And the town planner, the chief town planner, would now be renamed, and there would be a director of planning and development. Now, sir, in moving forward, the intention with these amendments is to have a one-stop, could be termed a one-stop shop, sir. This would enable us to bring together in a collaborative relationship representation from the Town and Country Planning and Development Office, which is being renamed the Planning and Development Department, the Environmental Protection Department, and the Building Standards Authority. It would bring these together to work in sync on projects. Currently, they work very disparately with different time frames for when you will get approval from one or the other. But we figured if we could bring them into a one-stop shop, what could, pardon me?
Town plan, I was saying repeat the three.
Oh, yes, sorry, Mr. President, I've been asked to repeat. It is the Town and Country Planning Department to be renamed the Planning and Development Office, the Environmental Protection Department, and the Building Standards Authority. That they would be able to work in sync, sir, to improve on the amount of time that it takes to get the approvals and the efficiencies with which you get them, so that in one place, we could get, for example, the planning permission, we could get the building start certificate, we could get the certificate of compliance, and we could get the occupancy permit, etc. In brief, the permissions and the approvals and the certifications required from start to finish for these projects could now be dealt with in a one-stop shop. We know, sir, that there is so much more to be done, but we have taken a stepped process towards improving this planning system. There will be more, and there's definitely more that will need to be done. We have a building code that has no standing in law at this time, sir. There will be need for a small committee to be struck, be it cabinet and others, to review and to take steps in that direction. We know that to go forward, we have to go forward as we would have started this process with extensive consultation with government, private sector, and non-state actors all at the same time. And I will say to you that the amendments that have been made here has in many ways emerged out of consultations, and they are supported. I have here the list of organizations that have already added their support to this, sir. It is off the edge. That is the Ministry of Transport, Works and Maintenance, the Ministry responsible for Health and Wellness, the Ministry for the Environment and Natural Beautification, the Barbados Institute of Architects, the Barbados Association of Professional Engineers, the Barbados Association of Architectural Technologists, all of whom have been consulted in us arriving, them and others, in arriving at where we are today. And so, sir, it is with the recognition of the extensive and meaningful conversations that we have had and we will continue to have, because we expect that this is legislation that will continue to evolve as we seek to do better in terms of our efficiency, in terms of our predictability, and in terms of our transparency, and to do better for those people we serve through the planning process. And it is with these few words that I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Recognize Senator Franklin.
Thank you, sir. I got up in this debate today with a bit of trepidation. For some reasons, you see, I didn't know this bill was coming today. I got a notice yesterday with 5 items on it, and no one said which one was coming. I'm not really prepared for this because I was making notes and consulting with people who should know better than me when I saw the bill, and I thought I would have some time. And I'm still waiting for my consultation. But the few things that I know from my own personal view, I will speak to. And the first thing that troubles me about the bill, sir, is the question of the draftsman. I remember some time ago, it came up and the Prime Minister had promised that draftsmen could go much higher. And I thought that is what they were going to do in this bill. But far from that, they have reduced what draftsmen can do, and they've limited it to 2,500 square feet. The only reason you would do that, sir, is because this bill is what I term a special interest bill. There's absolutely no reason why you would require a draftsman to build the 1-story or 2 stories or any more stories. To draw. Draftsmen don't determine if a building will stand up, neither do architects. I dare say, Mr. President, if you drew your own structure, you would have to get an engineer to determine if that structure could stand. So what this legislation should require is whoever draws the building, whoever designed it, they should be subject to a structural engineer approving the structure. So if you're an architect or an engineer, whoever draws it, a structural engineer should determine this building won't be able to stand up or it is good enough for our purposes. But we haven't done that. What we have done is try to seek to put draftsmen out of work and make money for architects. Yes, the architects will tell you that they went and studied and they now should be allowed to work in their profession with other people who didn't study and all that kind of thing. Now, if you went and studied something that you can't make the money, you're going to study something else. Every person who goes and studies law at KFL will not end up being a lawyer. He might end up being a magistrate somewhere else, but he knows the law. Who is to say that because you went and studied architecture, the government must guarantee you work? And when you do that, you have taken people with a lot of experience, because I used to work in the Ministry of Legal Affairs, and I sat next to some competent draftsmen who designed police stations. One of them subsequently went on and became the draftsman at the Ministry of Education planning unit, and he's done excellent work out there in the private sector. As a matter of fact, from large warehouses down to small. He will no longer be able to do the type of work that he's competent to do that he was doing for government for years. Simply because of this piece of legislation, because this is a special interest bill. It seeks to protect or to make sure the architects among us get work. That is bad enough. I understand from Senator McCorney, she said it emerged out of consultations. to consult with the people who are going to suffer as a result of this bill, the draftsman? I don't know if you did. But I have noticed this from the section 44, the new section 44. Let me just pull it up here for you, please. They put a new section 44 into the act. And that troubles me, a lot of it troubles me. And I'm asking for information because one of the things that I'm seeing here is that some of these professionals now can draw a building and approve it. You're going to be approving your own work. That's section 44A. Registered professionals can design a structure and approve it. Then they go on to say that if you found that you have done things wrong and they could punish you by some new professional body that this piece of legislation would introduce. I do not like the idea where you can approve your own work. It might sound good to those people, and it might sound good to the consultations that you had. But you were sitting down in the choir with only people of that ilk singing to you. So they will tell you what they want you to hear. Right? And they're related to the ease of doing business. Again, from Senator McConnell, she's talking about ease of doing business. A lot of people do not understand what is ease of doing business, how government, by their policies, make sure that the ease of that we have difficulty doing business in Barbados. I'll give you an example, and I use this one all the time. Like I can even use it. Government set out to restructure some of its work, some of its departments. You might be laying off people last year. You sent home people who were doing the work, and then say you can't get corporate affairs to be exact. I'm talking about corporate affairs had so much work they don't know what to do, and you sent home people. And those were the people responsible for registering businesses in Barbados and international business. There were about 50 people, and they were crying out for more staff, but you were not thinking about ease of doing business at the time. You were thinking about cutting the salary bill. So you sent home 8 or 9 of those people. So they couldn't get the work done when they were 50, but you expect them to do it at 48. You had lines going through the door as a result of the additional work that the last government put on these people, and then you send home people too. So don't blame the public servants for the ease of business, or the lack thereof. It is government policy that caused the backup. You do not give people the staff because you want to be a penny wise and a pound foolish. So as I told you, I had drafted notes, and I want to go back to, because it was all over the place with my notes, I want to go back to the point I was making with the architect and the draftsman. I made the point that it doesn't matter who draws the building as long as it can stand up. But you know what happens? This guarantees the architect some money. Architects charge you, it is 1%. It is 1%. Or 15% of the cost of the building. So let's say you, imagine what's happening, you're building a little house there and you got to pay the architect 15% of the cost of the building just for drawing it, but the draftsman was charging you $1 a square foot. So this bill is designed to take work out of those draftsmen's hands and put it in the hands of engineers who had a bigger voice. Not the engineers, sorry, the architects who have a bigger voice, who are the Prime Minister's ear. We have to stop this foolishness. We are passing too much special interest bills in this Parliament. We are doing everything for special interests. Last time we were here, they wanted to take their money from civil service and give it to their special interest friends. Everything about this administration is special interest. And you know, mind you, that you are great communicators. You can sell sand to people from the Sahara and make them want to buy it. But people will find you out in the end. You are not looking after the best interests of people in this country. You are looking after the interests of your friends. I am very sorry that you surprised us with this bill, because if I found only from this morning when I started to look at it, these many instances, there will be more. But one of the things I noticed, and I must get to this one though. Remember last year when this bill was being debated, I pointed out to you that you no longer put appeals from these tribunals to the High Court. People scoffed me off, because, what are you talking about, because I know people consider me as one of the northernmost airhead people, try to refer to me like that. The problem here, sir, is that you are now amending it to say a Court of Appeal. That's what I told you last time we were here. You don't listen. You just go and do what your friends tell you. And I'm not your friend, so it doesn't matter. I thought I should mention that, because even though I might know the most, I don't know all. But some people who just get up with their generic speeches that you can use in any debate whatsoever, because they don't really speak to the issues. They just speak for the sake of talking. They're generic, you can use that speech in a debate about anything. But I try to address the issues, and what I expect government to do is when they get to these issues, you address them rather than attack the messenger. I have another concern, and it's Section 44E. It deals with certificate of occupancy. I hope you people ain't really serious about this. I remember as a little boy growing up, we had a very small house, and my father would kill a cow, and he would add on a piece more to the house and stuff. That has been the Belgian way, has always been the Belgian way, where you would develop your property as you see a little bit more money coming your way. This certificate of occupancy now require you, it is Section 44E. Let me tell you what it says, because I do not believe that you people are serious. Page 17. Just could you bear with me, just please? I want to refer, and that's why I like the paper. I'll be scroll down. Yeah, page 17, the bottom of the page. It's certificates of they call it occupancy certificates. No person shall A, occupy one, a new or renovated building, or two, a new extension to a building, or permit any such new, renovated, or extended building to be occupied until an occupancy certificate has been issued with respect to the building. So I hope my interpretation of this is wrong. I'm hopeful that it is wrong. And please tell me that I am wrong. You know, if you live in a house and you start to fix it up, you want to move out. That's what it means? I don't know. As I'm saying, I'm hoping that this is not what you mean. This is what you've written, but I hope this is what you mean. So when you want to renovate your home, you know, you're building on a little piece, children getting big, and you can't have the little boy and the girl in the same room now because of whatever might happen. You want add on another bedroom for the youngster. You got to move out. Because you have to get an occupancy certificate. I remember when I approved mortgages years ago. I know I will get you.
Were you then in the role of bank manager, sir?
I was the chairman of the credit committee at Public Workers Credit Union. So as a result, we had to approve mortgages. You see, sir, I've done so many things. That's why there are these people here with earheads, but will always be jealous. Earheads and hairless heads. But we approve buildings to what we call a habitable stage. House ain't finished, but you got in the windows. The inside walls are plastered. Yeah, the roof is on. Thank you, sir. And you have one working bathroom. So you can live in there. And as you get a little bit more money, because sometimes the people do not have the money to complete the structure. Either through the mortgage, they don't qualify for a mortgage big enough to build the house that they want to build, or whatever the problem is. But we approved to a habitable stage, meaning you can live in it. Are we now saying that this can happen? Because I know of many laws that I approved that went this way. You live in it, and when you accumulate enough money, you get the mason to come in and do some more work. You know, and time going, eventually, you have a nice house. But according to what you have here now, under section 44E, the new section 44E, you will have to stay out, live at your mother, do something. But you can't go in the house because you are not permitted to live in there. Tell me that this is not what this Barbados Labour Party administration is doing to poor people. Because you are here to take care of the most vulnerable people, you know. But I find that you are not. You are taking care of your friends. You're making sure that they make the money. The architects make big money. You know, you're taking away public servant salary and get the people to build, do capital works. Everything that you have done is with special interest in mind. Pay some interest to the people who put you there. You are not. The bill is not all bad. There is a provision for the building code to enforce it, because we always had a building code for so long. It's funny. But you didn't have any enforceable standards in it. I must compliment you on that. You have actually put in place now. But what I'm telling you though is that since you have a building code, why do you need to restrict Draftsman or everybody else? Because it has to be done in accordance with the building code. So if you do not do it in accordance with the building code, you can't get approval. So why are you eliminating certain people from this work when you have safeguards? I remember some years ago, when this same Barbados Labour Party was in power, you decided that people who wire up houses for telephones must be licensed telephone wiremen or whatever you call them, I do not know. And I always ask myself, why? I can understand why it would be necessary for people wiring up for electricity. Because if you don't wire up the house correctly and something happens, people could burn up inside or something like that. But what is the worst thing that can happen when you don't work the telephone thing properly? The phone can work, that's your business. But you insisted to make sure that the people who were sent home from Cable and Wireless, through the deals that you had made with that company, that they find some work because Cable and Wireless was sending them home, and you had to find something for them to do. And you restricted people from doing their own thing, because I should be able to put wires through my house like a clothesline as long as my phone works. It's in your business. It was no danger to me or anybody else in the place. But this piece of legislation is similar to back then. So you are continuing your bad behavior. You know? Spare a little interest for the people who voted for you. Do not only wait every 4.5 years after the election to start looking out for their interests. They're suffering all the time. This bill is just going to put more hurt, more financial strain on people who can least afford it. Reconsider. Please. You are not helping. You are hurting. Thank you very much, sir.
Senator Nurse?
Mr. President, I'm halfway prepared for the debate. No, I knew it was on, though. I knew it was on. 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 And, sir, there can be no substitute at all for orderly development. And I mean orderly development in terms of our real estate, our residential areas, and the like. Sir, in an island as small as Barbados, it is definitely imperative that serious planning is given to our land use. We must be told, sir, which area of land can be designated as residential land. We have to be told, sir, which area of land can be designated as agricultural land, and even which area of land should be designated for hotel purposes. And some agency has to do that job. So the Town Planning Department of Barbados has the authority to approve or to disapprove building projects in this island. And that department, sir, is a very, very good watchdog. Without that department, sir, there would be utter bedlam in Barbados. This debate, sir, is about how we control and how we regulate building of houses in Barbados. It is about how we control and how we regulate our real estate developments. Has to do with impact studies too. How these developments can impact our environment. Now, sir, people have leveled all types of criticism at our town planning department. But I know, sir, that that department has stood up to some of the most influential, some of the most powerful, some of the most wealthy individuals in this country. That town planning department that gets so much cursing from time to time. Sir, there were occasions when those powerful persons, those powerhouses, were told that approval and permission for their projects would only be granted if certain conditions were met to the satisfaction of the chief town planner. And I know, sir, that no amount of coaxing, no amount of intimidation, no amount of bullying, none of it worked, because the town planning department and the chief town planner stood up to those powerful men. And, sir, they received no special attention, and that certificate of compliance, sir, was not granted by the chief town planner until the conditionalities were met. The conditionalities which were demanded had to be met first. Because it is clear the message coming from the chief town planner and those associated with planning, that planning orders, Mr. President, should not be flouted. Some of us want to have our own way. We want to let people know who we know. And sometimes, sir, you are told not to erect a wall more than 4 feet, but you still build a 10-foot wall. And then, sir, you are served with a notice of enforcement, and the wall comes down. And then, what a bad agency this is. Trying to, in some cases, you say, do this to the poor black man, and so on. But you had the conditionality there before. People, sir, will curse anything or any agency which they believe will slow down their work. Mr. President, we have to realize that most of the applications to town planning are approved, not rejected. So the town planning is not really the beast that many of us would want to believe. Some of us, sir, see it as an obstacle, but it is not. Mr. President, people may not always get everything that they want. A design, sir, that you want may be overhanging. It might be some overhanging of an awning or whatever. and that is a bit too much, and the town planning may make you change it. You don't get every single thing that you want. And as I say, if there was no town planning, sir, it would be chaos in this place. Town planning, for instance, sir, will not allow a hotel to block access to beaches. And every time it happens, you will see that there is some intervention on the part of that agency. It would be bedlam in this place if we did not have a department like that. Because even in the building of a hotel, one of the things which the town planning department would do is to see how the construction of that hotel will affect negatively or what other people. You know, sir, sometimes people are not willing to change their positions at all. And therefore, there's this big showdown. People are not willing to compromise a single inch sometimes. And there's a showdown. The only way, yes, sir. So yes, Mr. President, some very important applications too can take a year or so to process. Especially, sir, those that have to work on things like the impact study. But sometimes, sir, the applicant himself, the person applying to town planning, that person is asked to supply additional information. And that client gets turned off because you are asked to supply additional information. That person fails to cooperate. And then the delay really rests with the applicant, but all of the blame is put on the town planning department. You're asked to supply extra information. You don't, but then you curse the town planning department. As I said, it's a good watchdog. Sir, if we had no traffic regulations in this country, persons, sir, wouldn't stop at any major stops. Persons would drive any side of the road. Persons would drive at any speed. And similarly, Mr. President, if we did not have planning regulations in this country, especially those governing residential areas, Mr. President, your neighbor to the front would have his foul pens in your nostrils, and your neighbor to the back would have her pig pens in the same nostrils. But sir, because of town planning, we don't allow these things to happen. I say again, if we did not have a planning department like that, sir, there would be chaos in Barbados. And in truth and in fact, sir, enforcing town planning regulations, rules and regulations, is like creating law and order in building developments. That is what it really boils down to. You know, sir, the more we learn about government and how government works, the more we realize that there is duplication in government offices. There is. We learn about what obtains in certain procedures. There's a lot of red tape in government. You will learn, sir, for example, that when it comes to something like retirement by civil servants, by public servants, correspondence, sir, has to go to personnel administration, has to go to audit, has to go to the Treasury, Governor General, it comes back to thing. All that has to be done before you get your gratuity. And sir, public servants are told that you have to begin that process about 6 months or 8 months or whatever before your retirement date. Otherwise, you're not going to get those things on time. So all these things have to be done. Survey planning is concerned in Barbados too. There is duplication. There is duplication. Something may have to go to town planning, then it has to go to the planning division. It might have to go to the Ministry of Health. It has to go to the minister responsible for town planning, and all those things have to be done. And you still have to get input from all those various government agencies, government departments. So the time has come, sir, for us to give tighter deadlines and to get our applications off the desks of town planning and other departments as quickly as possible. And so this is why Senator McConney spoke earlier about getting close to making this a one-stop shop. That is what the same point she was trying to make. Because if you have to go through department by department and desk by desk, she's saying no, the time has come for us to pay closer attention to the planning, other planning sectors and agencies, and that they'll be working more closely with each other, and they'll be aiming to move the process a lot faster than happens now. And of course, sir, we would have been pleased to learn that there was a lot of consultation and that there was a national team on planning set up to do some of this work for us. Team for planning set up under the chairmanship of the Prime Minister, aimed at improving the facilitation role and not so much giving new regulations and restrictions, but saying how fast we could move the process along. Yes, I don't think this is consistent with special interest, sir. Someone said so earlier, sir. I don't think so, sir. So it's a matter, sir, of our trying to remove anything at all that slows the process down. So, Mr. President, sir, I can safely say that I have no problem whatsoever with the amendment in this instance. Sir, what I noticed Senator Franklin did speak to the 44E, and but I do believe, sir, that this is a matter more for safety of the individuals who are doing, whether it be a new house or whether it be an extension or whatever. I think it's a matter of safety, because when I look at the same section, it says in 2 that, section 7, sorry, and it says that substantial complaints, if the person has done anything called substantial complaints, and that means, sir, that something where there are no deficiencies in the building works that pose any threat to the safety, the health, and the welfare of persons within the vicinity of the building and so on, and it would to cause the minimal harm. I think that is what they're getting at there in the thing. But I don't think it's a matter of trying to stop people from building on an extra piece and so on. I think it's just trying to take care of them, that there is nothing in this, and section 2 says what the substantial compliance is, sir. Substantial compliance, yes, sir. So I don't think it is as rough and as loose as Senator Franklin would want us to believe. I'm obliged to you, sir.
Senator Nurse. Thank you, Mr. President. These amendments, to my mind, we do some tidying up in terms of the parent bill, which we would have extensively debated sometime last year, in addition to adding some other areas which would have been mentioned, but for which the detailed legislation would not have been in the original act. I've been thinking things like, for example, the building code, which is really new. And I applaud the government on this, having put this into the planning act. This is something that was discussed, that it was ventilated for several years now, as you would know, Mr. President, by successive governments, and nothing was done. So it seems as though we are finally making some headway in that area, and I think government is to be applauded for its introduction. The challenges I see would be for obviously the correct institutional arrangements for the timing of submission of plans, and more importantly for me, the sign off of the various building standards, the plans, specifications, and so on. And I make that point, Mr. President, because the issue of building codes and so on are going to be technical issues which will require the input, very high technical input from your engineers and so on. Who will be signing off on these matters? Will the department itself have its own engineers to review these areas relating to these codes? The point is that there is going to be some liability that can come out of these issues if something should go wrong. And therefore, I think it's important to understand and to have those, what I call institutional matters, structured and set up early on as the act gets going. As Senator McConney alluded to, and both Senator Greenidge also made the point, the whole act is really designed to make it more efficient, the whole process, the whole planning and development process more efficient. And what I think that is going to require, if we're going to have this concept of a one-stop shop, as it were, is to ensure that we have the capacity in the town planning department itself to be able to handle all of these additional issues and matters relating to building codes and so on that will now come under planning. Will now come under that department. I believe Senator Greenidge would have made the point, and it needs to be stressed, that there are a lot of departments other than the town planning department itself that are involved in before approval of a particular plan is granted. A lot of our development happens along the coastal areas. And therefore, lots of those, particularly hotels, for example, and they will require the input of departments like the Coastal Zone Management Unit. They will require inputs from the Ministry of Transportation and Works. If we look inland, they will require inputs from the experts in the Ministry of Agriculture. and these various other departments. The point I'm making is that there are a number of consultations that go on, and a number of things that are done are provided by departments outside of town planning itself. And the question is, how will all of these various departments that have to be consulted, all of the various issues that have to be resolved, how is all of this going to be managed and coordinated so that we see the level of efficiency and management of planning applications which we are hoping to achieve? I just want also to briefly, Mr. President, look at an amendment to Section 30, which really refers to those type of applications which require an environmental impact assessment study. In fact, if we look at Section 30 of the Parent Act, it says the chief town planner may require an environmental impact assessment to be carried out by the applicant in respect of any application for permission to develop land if the proposed development, by reason of its nature, scale, or location, could significantly affect the environment. But then it goes on to say, and this is in the amendment, unless the minister directs otherwise, the chief town planner shall. So it's a legal requirement. The chief town planner shall require an environmental impact assessment in respect of an application for development of any kind mentioned in the third schedule. And the third schedule is in the principal act, and those speak to things like major transportation infrastructure, including highways, airports, seaports, wharves, marinas, piers or jetties, fossil fuel, electricity generating plant and alternative energy generating plants, crude oil storage and refinery facilities, waste incinerators, sanitary landfill operations, solid waste disposal, sludge disposal, toxic waste disposals, etc. Sewage and wastewater treatment plants and desal plants, industrial plant for the manufacture, storage, or use of cement, chemicals, industrial estates and development projects, mining operations, operations involving land reclamation, dredging and filling of ponds, hotels or resorts complex in excess of 50 rooms, crematoria and funeral parlors, developments within the heritage conservation and areas of protected. All of these areas, the town planner shall. What worries me is that there is an override provided to the minister, having decided that the town planner has no choice but to require an environmental impact assessment for all of these things that we have just mentioned. The law now turns around and says, but the minister can dispense with this EIA. And that to me makes absolutely no sense. I think all of those various developments which we have mentioned are so significant, are too important for decisions to be made of them without the input of the professionals, that it should be left, that it can be left to the minister to decide if an environmental impact assessment is going to be done. So the problem obviously is that the minister is being given the authority to override override this legislation in this manner, And I think that, for me, is wrong, because in my opinion, such matters should require very serious professional judgment and should not be exercised by the person who is really there to make policy. And that, to my mind, is really an administrative function which should really be under the purview of the town or the director, as we are now being, the post is now being renamed. And therefore, we should ensure that professionals should at all times be the one making that decision about an impact assessment study. I also think that other areas where it seems to me that the management of the department by the chief town planner is being hindered is that it seems to me that how the act is structured now, it requires the chief or the director to obtain approval first from the board before he can actually delegate any function to his staff. And that really, to me, gets into the area of the management of the department, which is a function for the director and not really the board or the minister. And I think those are areas where I would have liked to see a level of that the director, I should say, the director should be allowed to function and to recognize that he is a very professional and technical person, and therefore be allowed to carry on in that manner. And so, Mr. President, those were really just the three main points I wanted to raise on this matter. I think that overall, the act and these amendments are good for the development of the department, and I would just hope that the various issues in terms of the staffing and the capacity and so on can be dealt with as quickly as possible, so that overall the department can function at the level that we hope to have it functioning, and to be able to produce the level of efficiency and competency with which we are expecting. And with those few words, Mr. President, I will bless you.
Thank you, Senator. I next recognize Senator Minard.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, it is indeed a pleasure to see that government has moved to put in place legislation for orderly development. However, we must not do it, Mr. President, without making sure that the things we propose can truly be monitored. And Senator Nurse has already mentioned the role of the Environmental Impact Assessment Committee, and that committee in the third schedule is laid out quite comprehensively, and is intended, Mr. President, to draw from the professional services of all the listed parties. But Mr. President, having done that, and that committee is supposed to report to the minister, it would seem self-defeating to give the minister authority to override it. Mr. President, we have seen in Barbados the effects of rapid development that might have brought in revenue, And every time the rain falls, we see the consequences on the West Coast. We see it on Highway 2A. And there's been no attempts, Mr. President, to fix some of it. We've had attempts by government to fix the ones in the north in Spikestown, and it still defeats us, Mr. President. It is really important, Mr. President, that with this bill, when it becomes an act, that the Environmental Impact Assessment Committee be given the full weight it deserves. At least, Mr. President, we may have rapid development, and whenever the rain falls or the tide rises, we are flooded, and there will be loss of life. Now, I too, like Senator Franklin, am a little bit disturbed by the requirement of the occupancy certificate, and my concerns have not been removed by the statements of the Deputy President. Not everyone, Mr. President, can build a concrete building in slab form and build it in 3 days. And we have all seen how Barbadians have very skillfully over the years been able to convert a chattel house into a concrete structure. And I worry that you'll be required to demolish your chattel house, empty the spot, and have enough money in a swift time interval to build a concrete structure. We've all seen houses converted to concrete and brick while persons have occupied them. And it's a special Barbadian skill, and we should not lose it. But Mr. President, there has to be space for green building. And world over, developments are being constructed with green buildings and at low cost. And we've seen fantastic developments that have won awards from buildings built from shipping containers as complete developments in entirely green neighborhoods with considerations for renewable energy, water conservation, that have been fantastic. And I hope that when planning permission is being considered and the building code is in place, it will provide for such buildings. Because not everyone can build a 3-story concrete building. And it does not mean that because your building is built from a shipping container, that it is not a quality building. Mr. President, we must, in the future, not make the same mistakes we've made with regulation of surface water. And when we plan developments, we have to, at the same time, consider what persons will do with the surface water. Whether it is a collection of water, as we have some new ones in the north, or long established streams like tree houses that are regulated. And Mr. President, some of us who have connections to St. Philip know very well of the battles of tree houses and the abuse that have happened at tree houses. And I'm pleased, Mr. President, that I heard recently that finally action has been taken at tree houses. Finally, Mr. President, finally there has been a leader who has been willing to get up and fix it. And I'm pleased, Mr. President, that she has fixed it, or plans to, Mr. President. We cannot allow individuals, Mr. President, to monopolize the water resources against the rules and exclude those who should have access. And there's absolutely no reason, Mr. President, why in a drought, and the drought has not yet ended, persons should be running a stream that is regulated by law into ponds for sailing boats and shooting birds, while the people who need the water for farming cannot get any, and they should have access. But Mr. President, the Environmental Protection Department also needs to make sure that the water is not contaminated. The stream in tree houses, Mr. President, is regulated by a very old, which you know, I'm sure, a very old act. I think it's 1793. And it guarantees that the pond called Brown Pond in the yard of Tree Houses Plantation should be accessible for persons to water their stock. I know it's used largely for irrigation purposes for the farmers who operate on the Free Houses estate. But, Mr. President, there is recreational bird shooting, and I have no fight with recreational bird shooters, but I have a problem where the lead shot and the cartridge cases are thrown into the stream, because I will eat some of those vegetables that are growing up there, and I would not like them to be contaminated with lead. So I would like that the Environmental Protection Department should take action to stop the contamination. And I speak on behalf of all those Barbadians who will be eating that food, not just those who are annoyed by it. And I really think that's a serious matter. Now, the matter, Mr. President, of occupancy certificates worries me. And while I understand that for reasons of safety and protection of occupants of buildings, both in commercial buildings and in residences, need to have inspections, I worry that in these times and these times ahead, which are likely to be harsh, that this legislation might prevent persons from being able to comfortably expand properties in the form and at the rate that they can afford. Because not everyone can add on a bedroom and move into it with marble tiles down and color rendered walls. They may need to move into when the roof is on, the ceilings may not be in, there's a window, and the walls are plastered, no tiles on the floor. So we have to be careful that while for larger developments, hotels and condominium complexes which I expect will be on the table for development, while some of the rules have to be enforced, that we do not stop those who are on the lower end of the economic scale from being able to safely occupy their homes. Mr. President, I made a note about the need to protect workers. Now, Senator Franklin spoke about his view of how this legislation will affect draftsmen. Now, a large amount of plans for development are done by draftsmen. In fact, I would venture to say that most are probably done by draftsmen, because draftsmen are often working in the offices of architects. And while draftsmen can independently produce plans, and they are limited in terms of the square footage and the heights of the buildings, I am not sure if everyone can afford, I'm sure in fact not everyone can afford the services of an architect. So you might be able to build a house that exceeds the specified square footage, but you cannot afford to pay an architect. And I worry in these times where we will probably see more extended families living together and pooling resources, that this legislation might restrict the ability of people to access housing in that regard. Overall, Mr. President, I support legislation, but I still have concerns that if we do not enforce some of the things we propose, that 20 years on, we might be looking back and wondering what we've done to our country. Mr. President, I'm obliged to you.
Senator Tate?
Thank you, Mr. President. This afternoon, sir, I more have questions than statements. I find that the planning and the development arena is one where I tend to seek clarity. You may recall, sir, that on the last occasion we dealt with this legislation, I believe it is the one we're seeking to amend now, which would be Bill 2019-5. I would have sought clarity with a statement that the Honorable Prime Minister made in relation to the number of stories that the draftsmen were allowed to build. She would have said, according to my memory, which I profess is not the best, but I recall I was seeking clarity, and I believe that Senator Walker clarified it for me, whereby she said in a public forum 10 stories. The legislation said 9, and he clarified it and confirmed it would be 9. So having received the proposed bill for today that we're debating, my question simply is, would the draftsman do the government? Because all of a sudden, without what I see, without any explanation, the 9 units have gone back to 2. So I'm confused because we had in the legislation 2019-5, the planning and development, it became an act. We had a section 44 which spoke to a person who is not a registered professional architect or engineer may prepare and sign building plans submitted in an application for planning permission for, oh, I beg your pardon, sir, I'm referring to section 44.3 of 2019-5. So a person who is not a registered professional architect or engineer may prepare and sign building plans submitted in an application for planning permission for A, dwelling houses and duplex dwellings, B, buildings of not more than 2 stories containing more than 2 dwelling units but less than 10 dwelling units, which according to mass means 9, because you can't do 9.5, and C, commercial buildings of no more than 464 square meters in gross floor area and no more than 2 stories in height, which I believe has to do with apartments. I could be wrong. With a 465 square meters, it's supposed to be 5,000 square feet. So we had a whole section that dealt with that. And sir, I want to highlight, in addition to that in the Act 2019-5, notice it said a person who's not a registered architect, a professional architect or engineer. So you were allowed to conclude that means draftsman. Let me state before I go any further though, sir, I don't have an agenda for and against architects or for and against draftsmen. I'm just seeking clarity based on what we would have done in the past. Architects, as I understand and I believe Senator Franklin made mention of it, the architects do study and they spend a lot of money becoming qualified. And there's a challenge with even them getting jobs in an environment where construction is on the down low. Draftsmen tend to be those who have been able to acquire experience in architectural offices or offices, even if not architectural offices, they have acquired experience, and I understand, but from government and all around have been able to rely on guidance from draftsmen. I always like to say my role is to be on behalf of the people of Barbados, and I ask questions when things are not clear. Having made reference to the then, or the existing section 44, we now have a situation where without any, I don't know, I wasn't invited to any of the consultations that I think Senator Greenwich made reference to. But now we have proposed amendments, first of all, that speak to a dwelling house. But no, you know what? I want to go back and speak to what the proposed legislation says. So remember, before it was a person who is not a registered professional architect or engineer may, etc. Now we have this type of language in the proposed section 44(4). Pardon? The proposed clause 44(4), except for simple building application. That sounds like, unless you're doing a complex application, your simple application gonna result in a house that gonna fall down. Because this is how you put it. Except for simple building application. So understand that draftsman can only do simple. I am certain how to feel about that, because everything else with the proposed legislation speaks to making sure that the buildings are going to be done properly. So I don't know I don't know if I like that language. The other act had it put in a better terminology. But in clause 7, it says, in this section, simple building application means an application to construct a dwelling house or duplex of not more than 2 stories. Remember, it was less than 10. Now we at 2 for sure. It was 2. We went to 9, now we're back at 2. The gross floor area of which does not exceed 232.5 square meters. That's 2,500 square feet. I don't know what that means, but it sounds small. B, a building of not more than 2 stories in height containing more than 2 dwelling units, the gross floor area of which does not exceed 465 square meters, which is the 5,000 square feet. And a commercial building of not more than 2 stories in height, the gross floor area of which does not exceed 465 square meters. So, Mr. President, I am asking again, what the draftsman did or did not do that in less than a year, or just over a year, they went from being able to build a 9-unit building to back to 2. So we have draftsmen who would have been impacted by the downturn in the construction industry, who may have been laid off or terminated from an office and had to go on their own, faced with the possibility that they may not get any work because they can't build anything from which they can generate the same type of income as if they were able to build the 9 stories. I don't know if there's a rationale behind it, but I would like to know, because the Prime Minister herself had indicated, I'm subject to correction, that she did not want to disadvantage that group when it came up last year, just before or while we were debating this particular piece of this area of legislation. But here we have, very quietly, no fanfare, no warning, we gone back to 2. I just want to know what it is that they've done or did not do, that we have had this change. As a matter of fact, Mr. President, the change is so mega, MEGA, that the whole section in the 2019-5 has been deleted. The whole section gone. Any reference to the 9 stories and all of that is out, and we have a completely new section to put the draftsmen squarely in their place. Except for simple building application, you must build a 2-story. Simple building. I'm curious, sir. I'm just asking. I'm just asking what has happened, that this group that was protected seems not so much protected anymore. I just want to know what happened. Is it fair? Is it feasible? What's the issue? Because I've been informed that the biggest house in Sandy Lane was done by a draftsman. So what's the issue? And I'm asking because it was dealt with by me asking questions on the last occasion we were here, particularly getting, as I said, clarity from what the Prime Minister said and what was reported in the press and what the legislation spoke to. So I'm asking. I'm just asking. With respect to the occupancy certificate, I too am concerned about that. I understand, Senator Greenidge, I do, that the focus is to make sure that you have, you're protected and it's safe and it's healthy to be in that, to occupy a new or renovated building. I know there's provision, I shouldn't say no, I see that there's provision for a temporary certificate of occupancy for part of a building which may be safely occupied prior to completion of the rest of the building, which is a good thing. And sir, I'm referring actually to clause 44E 5. And 6 speaks to the certificate of occupancy being granted subject to such terms and conditions as the director sees fit and remain valid for such period from the date of issue as is specified therein. My question is, what happens if you don't get the certificate, if you don't get the what name? The certificate of occupancy. What happens if you don't get it? Where do you live? Where do you go? What happens to you? Because this certificate seems to be one that will be issued upon the completion of any building works in substantial compliance with the terms of a building permit. So as Senator Franklin suggested, it looks as if you're going to move out to do a renovation, even if you are extending. So yes, there's provision for the temporary certificate, but if you don't get it, what does it mean? I always like to know what it means if things don't happen in accordance, because first thing first, the board shall within 7 days issue this occupancy certificate. That's interesting. This board is going to be full-time? Or this board going to be chosen from men and women that have their jobs? Because 7 days means you're working full-time. Because you're not going to get one application a day. So I'm just, in terms of logistics and practicality of the things that are being proposed, I understand the intention. But realistically, is it going to work? And in the meantime, what do you do if it doesn't work? Back to the draftsmen, if they have to stick to 2, and people are a little, you doing simple, I don't know if you should bill for me, how do they continue to contribute to the economy? How do they continue to feed their families? How do they continue to live and exist? I just am asking questions, Mr. President. I noticed, though, your occupancy certificate has a prescribed fee. Up the government making sure no matter what, money making. It's duly noted. It doesn't say that the temporary certificate has a fee, but I expect it has a fee. I also noticed that you've gone to the Court of Appeal. I understand that that is what is the correct thing. But just for the record, Court of Appeal has a higher cost than High Court. I'm just saying. I think when things are going to impact the people close, they should be ventilated, circulated, and made public. An occupancy certificate will affect people more than a complex application. And certain things, I think, Mr. President, when it's going to happen, should be put into the public domain before it gets here. Because once it gets here, no matter how many no's, it's probably going to be passed. So people will not get an opportunity to speak or ventilate or reach out to an independent senator to share their concerns with what is being proposed. I think people should have more notice and be aware so that they can make their submissions to whoever they deem necessary in the circumstances, like a draftsman who's an identified, viable, and real group in our country, and persons who, as Senator Maynard mentioned, might want to change their wooden house to a wall house. And if they don't have anywhere to go, what happens if they don't get a certificate? What happens if it's not flowing as beautifully as it appears here in the bill? What happens, sir? I'm just asking. I'm much obliged to you, sir.
Thank you. Senator Rogers.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I just rise to speak briefly on this amendment. Within the context of several things that we have discussed here over the last week or so, I think it is timely that we are trying to put our house in order, no pun intended, when it comes to the planning department and how we will go about developing our country. I think for a long time, this has been a bugbear for many persons because to get your plan out of the planning department sometimes depended on who you knew or who sent it in for you. And that has caused a lot of problems for persons who've been trying to develop, as you heard from Senator McConney earlier. And so it is a good thing that we're looking at this. Also within the context of what we would have been discussing last week with the catastrophe bill, we all know that there is such a thing as global warming, and it is important to ensure that our building code and the types of buildings we're erecting in our country are good enough to protect the citizens, even though I think we've gotten to the stage where nature has outwitted humanity, in the sense that I do not think that we can build anything to withstand some of what we've seen in our region only recently. Just last year, we saw the inundation of houses in Abaco, and we saw other things over the last few years, which tells us that it doesn't matter what you build. I remember a gentleman in another Caribbean country, I wouldn't call it a country. After a serious hurricane had passed through his country, he built a house that was supposed to be hurricane-proof. Everything was concrete roof down, and it exploded because of the pressure that developed in it. I've said all of that to say, and this is a different discussion sometime later on, that I think we should start looking at building replaceable houses rather than trying to build to withstand nature. Build something that we can easily replace and move on after that. But where this particular bill is concerned, it may sound like we're beating the same old drum, but I'm very, very concerned about the plight of the draftsman, especially within the context of the phrase that has been going around in the COVID-19 period, life versus livelihoods. Lives versus livelihoods. And it would seem to me that the livelihood of the draftsman is somewhere jeopardized in this amendment. Rather cleverly, though. As you would have heard Senator Tate speak just now, in the 2019 bill, which would have come after a passionate plea and much desk thumping in the other place, after the Prime Minister, who was on file saying, "My government is not an insensitive government. I have heard the calls of the people so as to facilitate the ability of draftsmen to be able to continue to work on single dwelling houses and duplexes and apartments up to a number of 10 apartments, which would significantly allow them to continue to maintain their way of life and their earning," end quote. It entered the bill of 2019. But somehow, quite similar to the use of scheme in boss, which we didn't know whether it was a noun or a verb, we have some gymnastics with words here where we've moved from a person who is not a registered professional architect or engineer to someone submitting a simple building application. And somewhere in there, that person fits into, we assume, the person who is not a registered professional. I don't know why they took that out of the bill, and now it's just a simple building application. No mention is made in the amendment of the number of units this person can build. In section 44 and 3 of part 5 of 2019, it's stated clearly that a person who is not a registered professional or architect or engineer can build buildings of not more than 2 stories containing more than 2 dwelling units but less than 10 dwelling units. That's clear. In this amendment, it now says in section 44 and 7b, a person submitting a simple building application can build a building not more than 2 stories in height containing more than 2 dwelling units. But then it goes on to say the gross floor area of which does not exceed 5,000 square feet or 465 square meters. And this is ambiguous because it really limits what what can they really build. In other words, can we get some clarity on what is the standard size of a dwelling unit? Is there a standard? Is there a minimum? And how many of those fit into the 5,000 square foot parameters that you've given these people now? Is it still up to the 10, or is it just more than 2, 2.5? So the legislation in itself, to me, has moved from something that was very clear in 2019 to something that is now quite ambiguous in 2020. And one has to question why. Why has it gone from something that you can clearly see and something that the Prime Minister herself pleaded for these persons to have? And then all of a sudden in 2020, it goes to this strange word, and you can build more than 2 dwelling units, but the gross floor area must not exceed 5,000. And it raises questions. It puts limits on persons. Because whereas limits in the sense of who may be your clients. You see? Because for me, given my last pay slip, if I had to build something, I don't even know if I can make the 5,000 square feet. But you see, you will have different clients with different needs. And by limiting the size here, I think you're limiting the scope of works these persons can have. And that, for me, is where the problem lies in this legislation. And I don't think we're in a hurry. I think this is something that can easily be rectified because there's no explanation. I can't see any explanation of moving from what was drafted in 2019 to what is now here in 2020. And so it just causes one to ask questions. And you know, the reality is that some of these draftsmen, as you would have heard from Senator Tate, are probably persons that would have designed some of the biggest buildings in Barbados. But simply because they were working under a particular name, it's all right. And it really brings into question lots of things we've been discussing here. It brings into question, how do we see technical vocational education and training? How do we see CVQs? How do we see those types of qualifications? Or is it only the persons who have paper from certain places or at certain levels? I can speak frankly that having lots of paper doesn't really give you much. You know? But the reality is that I think that we are putting some persons at a disadvantage here. And it comes at a time in COVID-19 when we've been talking about protecting livelihoods. And if the intent, and I hope it wasn't, of this legislation was to let these people know their place. In our Barbados, where we're trying to move a statue, and we're talking about Black Lives Matter, I think we have bigger problems than we really are willing to admit. And this is one of them. And so I want to encourage us. I don't think we need to pass this in this particular state. I would like an explanation of why we moved from Part 5 of 2019, Section 44 and 3, to what we now have as 44 and 7. What is the rationale? Why have we moved from a number of dwellings to simply a square footage? And until I can get that explanation, Mr. President, I cannot see myself supporting this particular legislation. With those few words, I thank you very much.
Senator McCartney?
Mr. President, I thank all of my honorable colleagues for their contribution. While I will be unable to answer all in the time that we may have left in this day, all of the questions that were asked, I will certainly seek to address some of those that were the most salient points I think that were made. Now, first of all, let me start with the simple points, where I believe it was Senator on the opposition side who suggested that this bill was a surprise bill and sought to explain his lack of preparation as this being a surprise. And I just would wish to remind Mr. President that notice was given on June 3rd, 3 weeks ago, of this bill, that the bill was read for the first time on June 10th, and that, sir, it was published in the Official Gazette on April 27th. So when we look at these dates, that the Honorable Senator Franklin would be in some way surprised at this bill, I think he is busy surprising himself on many different levels.
Mr. President, a point of order.
Sir,
I hate when people attribute improper motives to me. Look, we get a whole set of bills coming before us. Sometimes you get 5, you get 6. Then we come in here, we do 1. I said I was not aware that we were doing this one. I came in here this morning only to find. That's what I said. Do not misquote me. Do not misrepresent me. Do not stoop so low as to try to score those kind of stupid points, because it doesn't do you any good. Government does not help the opposition or the others. You come prepared. You have the bills. You know what will come. We do not know. We only know. I only knew this morning when I came here what will be debated today. So why are you trying to deceive the country and yourself?
You've exhausted your point of order.
thank you, Mr. President. Let us continue. A second point that was raised, sir, was that draftsmen are in some way being left out, carved out, cut out of this bill. And those are my terms, sir. Those are not the terms used. I'm paraphrasing at this point in time. But I wish to say that this bill is not about special interests, as some might have this honorable House believe. This bill is about standards. And we cannot expect that we are going to have one standard for international persons who would wish to invest in Barbados and have a different standard for locals. We certainly want to give the level of seriousness to the standards to ensure that where you have a matter of life or death in some cases in terms of these dwellings, that we are taking the standards quite seriously. I would like to say, sir, that on July 16th, the Draftsman, of which many people are speaking about, this is July 16th, 2018, they participated in a focus group at Baobab. They were well aware of the fact that detailed plans would be submitted in the way that this amended legislation would propose. First of all, let me explain that there is a two-stage process that did not exist before. The first stage being that stage of planning control and planning permission, and the second stage being that stage of building regulations or building plans. Now, in the planning permission or planning control stage, however you wish to call it, the draftsman can indeed prepare these plans. And in fact, there is an exercise that has been ongoing. In fact, it is now concluding, and I am told that the draftsmen have themselves submitted their input to a table of qualifications that will determine how the draftsman must be qualified in order to participate in that stage one, which I was speaking about, that planning, control, planning, permission stage. They were a part of drafting those very same qualifications that will be in the tables of qualifications. And in fact, that is going to be when I say that, I refer to the table of qualifications, will be part of the planning regulations that are referred to in section 104. It is therefore, sir, not true that the draftsmen have not been engaged. Additionally, sir, Mr. President, stage 2, which I spoke about, which is now when you get into the detailed business, the detailed plans, that regulatory stage. The impression is given that something is being taken away from the draftsman. Now remember, the Town and Country Planning Department never used to see the detailed plans. They used to be sent to MTW, and they used to, the Ministry of Transport, Work and Maintenance, and they used to be sent to the Environmental Protection Department. It is now under this new dispensation that is the Planning and Development Department, where we are seeking to create that one-stop shop that will include all of these three entities, the environmental, the building standards, which is with MTWM, as well as the planning department. It is now under this that we are seeking to be able to bring them all together to be able to look at the detailed plan. So I think perhaps one way of explaining is that people have to understand that there are two different stages. And I don't think that people understand the two different stages, and that indeed the draftsmen have themselves participated in not only focus group, but further consultations over the last more than 1 year that have helped to set the qualification standards that the draftsmen themselves will in fact have to meet, and they have accepted them in writing with regards to where we go from here. I want to say, sir, that anyone looking on and listening, perhaps to Senator Franklin, might come to the conclusion that his argument could be a dishonest argument in terms of misrepresenting the process by which we got here, giving the impression that draftsmen have been excluded in some way and have been deliberately disenfranchised for special interests. That's number one. Someone else might think it a dishonest argument, that there's misrepresentation of the practices that we are trying to instill as it relates to standards, and that it isn't about special interests, it is really about standards, and that there might be some misrepresentation, sir, about the effect on draftsmen in practice. I might not say so myself, sir, because I would not want to be accused of ascribing certain motivations to others, but I will leave it for people, other Barbadians, to decide. There was a point that was also made I believe it might have been by Senator Nurse, about there being some need for liability insurance by government, etc. If we look around the world, sir, there are different models for how we go about giving the kinds of approvals that are there. It is where you have people draw the plans and government will give the approvals. That's one. Another one is where people draw the plans, but then we transfer the responsibility and liability to professionals, private licensed professionals, to be able then to give the approvals. And if there is any perceived misconduct, then there are penalties, including them possibly losing their licenses and other things. And they are the ones in this particular scenario that we are proposing. It is the second of those two that is being proposed, and therefore that liability insurance will be something that would have to be taken out by those professionals. So I trust that that also addresses that particular concern. Mr. Maynard, Senator Maynard, I'm sorry, sir, Senator Dr. Maynard, spoke of the fact that there were some concerns about persons moving from a chattel house to a more a wall, a brick dwelling, and what could happen to them. And I believe some other senators also raised that. Certainly 44E speaks to the occupancy certificate in subsection 5, and it permits temporary occupancy of parts of the building prior to completion of the whole. Note also that subsection 2 provides for certificates that will be issued at different stages of substantial compliance. And we can look, sir, at subsection 7 for a definition of what is meant by that. I'm not going to go into all of the details. Senator Tate also raised some significant and important questions. I am not sure what Senator Tate heard, but I may have heard that the reference was made to 9 units and not necessarily 9 stories. But in any case, regardless of who heard what, Section 48(8) of the existing law as it relates to the Engineers Act, it says that there is a limit of 2 stories for a draftsman, and that only an engineer can do the work for above 9 stories, and that's in the Engineers Act. And therefore, we would wish, I am sure, as we go forward, to be consistent as far as we can. There are many...
Mr. President, though, I don't mean to interrupt Senator McCartney, except that my point was that in the 2019-5 legislation, the draftsmen, by virtue of them being not professional architects or engineers, were allowed to build up to less than 10 units. The proposed legislation restricts them to 2 units. I may have used the word story and unit interchangeably. For that, if I cause confusion, I do apologize. But I was seeking to, I still maintain that the change from the existing legislation, 2019-5, to the proposed amendment that we are debating today, takes the draftsman from less than 10 units back to 2 units, and therefore that was my question. I'm not sure about Senator McCartney's reference to the engineers legislation because the draftsmen wouldn't be covered there. I was just seeking to understand how you, at one moment, were giving them the ability to do more than 2 and less than 10, and now they're restricted to just 2 units. That's what my question was about, Mr. President. Thank you very much.
That was a very long point of order, Matt, sir. Thank you for your indulgence in this regard. I really wish to say thank you very much, sir, for the patience that you have shown. And I just lost my train of thought. Anyway, At this point in time, sir, I really trust that the explanations that I have given and the references that I have provided, and the fact that this act this bill in its current form was shared and was agreed by the very draftsmen that are so worthy of the level of attention that they have received, I think it is important for us to note that that consultation has indeed been inclusive and it has been significant. And sir, it is with these few words that I beg to move that this bill be now read a second time.
The question is that this bill under consideration be now read a second time. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. And we think the ayes have it. Now leave the chair.
Mr. President, I beg to move that you do now leave the chair and allow the Senate to resolve itself into committee.
The question is that I do now leave the chair. The Senate resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate for the further consideration of the bill in detail. All honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it, and we are now in committee.
The Senate is now in committee.
Clauses 1 to 5.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that clauses 1 to 5 stand part.
The question is that clauses 1 to 5 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clauses 6 to 10.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that clauses 6 to 10 stand part.
The question is that clauses 6 to 10 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clauses 11 to 15.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that clauses 11 to 15 stand part.
The question is that clauses 11 to 15 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clauses 16 to 20.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that clauses 16 to 20 stand part.
The question is that clauses 16 to 20 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clauses 21 to 23.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that clauses 21 to 23 stand part.
The question is that clauses 21 to 23 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the schedule be the schedule to the bill.
The question is that the schedule be the schedule to the bill. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Report.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported to me the passes of the bill under consideration in committee.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill now be read a third time.
The question is that the bill be now read a third time. Honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Planning and Development Amendment Act 2020.
The question is that the bill under consideration do now pass and be so cited Honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no.
No, divide.
A division has been called for. Mr. Clark, you can do the counting.
Just checking to make sure everyone's here, sir. We don't have the bill like down the road that we can summon people, so the marshals just gonna check to make sure everyone's here. Senator Moore,
Aye.
Senator McConney,
Aye.
Senator Dr. Springer, Senator Dr. Holder,
Aye.
Senator Adams,
Aye.
Senator Dr. Haynes,
Aye.
Senator Grant, Senator Cummins,
Aye.
Senator Sands, Your Honor, Senator Greenwich,
Aye.
Senator Franklin,
No,
Senator Drake,
No.
Senator Dr. Rogers,
No.
Senator Maynard, Senator Tate,
No.
Senator Nurse,
Aye.
Mr. President, the
9-4, 9-4. So you got 11-5.
Mr. President, the results of the division. 11 honorable senators voted in favor of the motion, and 5 senators voted against.
In the face of the number of senators who have voted in favor of the bill and 5 who have voted against the bill,
Therefore, the bill is
the
passed.
bill has passed and will be cited as
Planning and Development Amendment Act.
Planning and Development Amendment Act 2020. This is just be adjourned for 2 weeks.
We adjourn for 1 week or 2?
Adjourned for 2 weeks.
Sign it. Sign it. Sign it.
Saturday.
Mr. President, I beg to move that we now adjourn. Sign it.
Question is that we now adjourn the sitting of the Senate before the day appointed. All honorable members, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it. We will adjourn until we've been given notice to return. Sign it.